click we are streaming. We are most definitely live on the internet right now.
Okay.
And I'm just going to go over to my YouTube dashboard, and in a few seconds I should see that we've got, yep, it's working. We've got live stream working, and in a few seconds I should be able to see that it's going out. The stream is actually about 20 seconds behind live, but I can see it right now, and it looks good. All right, keeping it real simple. Now there is a chat component to this, and as I think you saw during the day, I invited a bunch of people. Well, I kind of syndicated it on YouTube and Facebook, and I sent out some emails with the wrong year. A couple people responded, so I don't know. Maybe we'll see some people come in, maybe we won't. But I'll kind of keep my eye on the chat because there's a chat window in YouTube
Okay.
where people can write things in, and I'll keep Twitter open as well, and I'll put your picture right next to the camera so that I can. So it probably seems like I'm looking right at you right now.
Okay.
All right, good. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Um, I'm Charlie Stern, and this is Red Blue Talk Live, and I'm very pleased because tonight my guest is Vivett Dukes. Vivett is a teacher, a writer, and a frequent blogger on I think, a relatively new blog called New York School Talk, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description of this live stream. And so I've had the pleasure of reading a number of things that Vivett has written over the past several months on that website. Um, and I have to say, Vivett, you are an excellent writer. And what's really wonderful about the things that I've read is that it seems, from my perspective, like everything that you've written is right at eye level for you. So you're writing about some very serious matters, educational topics, um, social topics, but everything from the experience that you yourself have had. Live
Yes.
TV, right?
Yes. Right.
So what we're going to talk about tonight is a recent blog a couple of weeks ago that you wrote called "I'm Not Your Boo: The Politics of Language." And I guess we can go ahead and jump right in. I hope that I provided an adequate description. You're a teacher, writer. You're also an advisory board member for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you know a few things about a lot. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what that article was about at a high level? What is language appropriation?
Okay. So, language appropriation is a term that I learned about by Jane Hill. She wrote an article called "Linguistic Appropriation: The History of White Racism is Embedded in American English." I read that article about 2 years ago, and I commented on it in a Facebook thread. And a friend of mine, a young lady I grew up with in high school, we had a discourse back and forth where she basically said, that language doesn't belong to anyone. We don't have, there are no words for blacks to claim or whites to claim. And I starkly disagreed with her and said, absolutely. And that was really the catalyst for this blog that I wrote because it resonated with me so deeply and it changed the way I heard language um, on the news when I heard terms like bling and bay and terms that I know as a black woman, our community created it, hip hop culture created it, but yet it wasn't really deemed cool until white America got a hold of the word. Then all of a sudden it was like commonplace. So yeah, that was really what the blog is all about.
So, if I could just ask Vivette, just kind of center yourself a little in front of the camera so we can see your whole face.
Sure.
You don't have to get closer, just to kind of be in the middle. Perfect. Looks good. So here's I want to come back to something that you said, that nobody owns words. So um, a lot of what you write about in this article, and one specific experience, I guess you work in a school and one of your colleagues came up and used a common black colloquialism, made you uncomfortable. Tell us about that experience.
Sure. The teacher, who was white, came to me in a room full of other colleagues and said, "Hey, girl." And that's something that is associated for me. A white woman wouldn't approach me like that at all. That's something that not only a black woman, but one of my homegirls would talk to me like that.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely not in a work environment for that matter. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That was like a phone call. "Hey girl, what's up? How you doing? What's going on?" So I found it to be so disingenuous for her to address me in that way. And the only reason she addressed me that way, because in her stereotypical mind, that's the way that you address a black woman. And that
So
is part of language appropriation.
so then let's get to the root of what about that was appropriated. What was appropriate? Appropriate means what? To take, to steal,
Hey,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
what's been stolen? What's being stolen when a white person uses black colloquialisms inappropriately, or at all? Or tell me.
Well, what's being stolen is the essence of the words, the taking of the word. It's almost like a pirating of it, a redistribution of the words, if you
Mm-hmm.
will,
Mm-hmm.
making them making them cool because a white person said it, but they're not your words to use. And like they'll take it and they'll make money off of it and use it in advertising and use it on slogans on shirts. But the black community never profits from it. No one knows that this came from our community at all.
Mm-hmm. So is language appropriation under the big umbrella of cultural appropriation? Because I've heard that expression um, where, let's say you're a clothing designer and you use an Aztec design or something like that on your shirt, but,
Yes,
you have nothing to do with Mexican culture. You just like the design. Then you're selling sweaters and you're making millions of dollars. That's cultural appropriation that you're actually directly profiting from. In your
yes,
example, hey girl is an injury, but it's not, she didn't get rich saying it. So what's appropriated is in essence is what? Identity?
yes. We make American culture cool. Black people in general advance American culture. When you look at the history, for example, of American music, don't go further than jazz and hip hop to see that this is true. We contribute to the national lexicon. We take words, bling, bootylicious, yo, what's up, holla, trippin'. We create all these words. They come from our neighborhoods.
Right.
And then you see like the white girl on the image that you use to promote this on fleek.
Right. Right. That was a great picture, right?
Great picture.
So what is that? What is the story in that? I mean, what's the caption on that photo? Let me see if I can bring that up for
It's
you.
just white privilege factor that they can take and try on black culture without any consequence. I don't think our blackness is there to be tried on and taken off at will, whether it be in words, in clothes. Like, if you're gonna be down with us, then be down with us for real. If you're down enough to stay on fleek and bay and all these other things that you try on from our culture, then get with Black Lives Matter and get out there and help stop the killings of black men. And let's get education on track so that black and brown kids get proper schools. Like, take on the full burden, not just the coolness of it.
That makes eminently sensible. So you wrote another article called "How Hip Hop Builds Bridges to Students." So
Yes,
let's bring this to the level of the school.
yes,
So in school, right? I think the general idea is English is the most important subject there, mathematics and English, right? You're
yep.
an English teacher. You teach seventh and eighth grade, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
How do you, or do you reconcile? Do you have to reconcile um, black colloquialisms with teaching English? And I know that I think you're a fan. I'm stepping out and saying I think you're a fan of Chris Emdin, the professor from Columbia University, who really is putting forth the idea that there's a way to uh, use hip hop culture and make it a part of lesson planning. Maybe you can explain that better than I can. But how do you do that? Because on the one hand, yeah, I mean, if you have white people behaving badly and just and for me, it's making fools of themselves talking like that in a way, um, making people uncomfortable and really just exhibiting kind of a multicultural unawareness and at the same time, that might be a perfectly normal mode of speech for the African American children who are in your school, but yet, you don't want language to confine them to their block. How do you reconcile all of this?
I think there is the bridge is authenticity. So, what I found disingenuous about my colleague's approach to me was that it wasn't authentic. If that was the way that I heard her speak and knew of her to speak in general, then that would not have rubbed me the wrong way like
Right.
it did. The same thing with white teachers who are attempting or wanting to use hip hop as a means of bridging that gap between themselves and their students or as a way to reach their students. You have to really know the culture of your students, right? You can't just say, "Oh, they're black. I'm going to come with Nas's latest album and we're going to dissect the lyrics of this song."
Mm-hmm.
No, that you would have to do more background. How about we watch Hip Hop Evolution on Netflix as some precursory professional development before I teach such lessons, so that I don't. And that goes for me too. I don't profess because I'm black that I know the history of hip hop. I don't. I think just that authenticity is what makes the difference between just arbitrarily using hip hop in the classroom and a teacher, white, black, Asian, whatever, genuinely knowing, all right, this is the culturally relevant pedagogy tool that I'm going to use to reach my students. There's a big difference there.
So be comfortable in your own skin, and you're a better teacher.
Absolutely. And be comfortable saying, I don't know this. Hip hop is not my thing.
Right.
I'm stepping out on this, guys. I'm gonna need you to teach me some things. What do they mean when they say so and so in this song? That's a great way to bridge things. Now students become teachers. Now there's a rapport building going on between teachers and students. Now all of a sudden, when Miss Smith, for lack of a better name, comes and says, "Hey girl," to her student, it's like, "Oh, she's down now. She got it. We taught her that." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's a difference there.
Right. It comes back to that one word that you keep using, which is authenticity. Now, coming back to this concept of language appropriation,
Yeah.
you started off tonight saying that nobody owns words.
Mhm.
Yet language.
I did that. My colleague said that. I disagreed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So she says nobody owns words, which is, I suppose, is like one corner of this idea. The other corner is, candidly, in your blog article, you really put language appropriation right into the same column with white supremacy, flat out. Tell me why. Tell me why that is.
I think that the ability to pick and choose when you want to borrow and copy words and styles and everything, hairstyles, ways of dress, like that is something that's a privilege of a white person in America. And it's so ingratiated in the privilege is such a part of many white Americans that they oftentimes don't even see that they have this privilege. They don't That's why my colleague couldn't understand when I said, no, those are words that we created. She was offended by that. That the white
Right.
privilege stopped her from being able to even see, like, you're pilfering and pirating words and a lot of other things from a culture that you oppress at the same time. You oppress these people, but you take things from them too. How is that right?
From a certain distance, it's not hard for anyone to understand that there are certain words that are so charged, no white person should use them. There's a couple of very obvious ones, right? Um, but then when you move into the realm of on fleek or some of these other things, it's, I think, harder for a white person to understand why there are boundaries around it. And maybe even harder to understand how it's white supremacy. White privilege, easier to understand. White supremacy, pretty heavy. And I even heard something on NPR this afternoon when I was driving home, where they were talking about the term white supremacy itself is starting to be, um, uh, uh, the guy said, I'm not saying whether he's right or wrong, the guy said misused. That the term racism is now been overused and applied to so many things that it's like we need a more powerful drug, and it's white supremacy.
Mm.
I'm curious what you think about that, and whether or not it fits into this whole conversation on language appropriation.
Um, that I'm not, I would have to really think more about that before I commented on it. I would say, though, in that vein, that to be naive enough to think that language is not political, which is the realm that white supremacy and white privilege and all that really falls under. There's a political aspect of it.
Yeah.
Language is political. Certain languages are deemed more socially acceptable than others, and white um, the white privilege part comes in when again whites are able to take on and try on, and it's only when they use words that they did not create, or they use a style that they do not create, that all of a sudden the mainstream culture deems it cool. But if little Jamal Jackson were to write on fleek in his essay, he would be deemed like, oh, something's wrong with Jamal. Why is he using his Ebonics or his African American language in an essay? But why is it okay if the journalists on Good Morning America use these terms, but it's not okay for Jamal Jackson to use these terms when the terms come from Jamal Jackson's neighborhood?
Well, that's a very legitimate question. I'm not going to profess to answer it. Is that something that comes up in teaching English in the seventh grade in the inner city?
I think it comes up for me all the time. I can only speak for Vivett Dukes, but it definitely, those questions do arise for me. Why is one use of language more appropriate or more acceptable than another? And don't get me wrong, of course, we teach audience to our students. You can't, compose an essay the same way you're going to compose a text message to a friend, but it's beyond that. It's just this, and maybe I'm being too sensitive about it. I don't think so. Jane Hill is sensitive about it also, and I'm sure many other people. But there is this sense of not giving credit where credit is due,
Mm-hmm.
and a piracy of words, of ideas, of a contribution that we make to the greater American society that we don't get credit for.
Well, you sound like a great English teacher.
Thank you.
I think I'd want to write an essay in your class. Um,
I think I would love to write an essay in my class.
so on your article about hip hop building bridges to students,
Yes.
you talk about a couple of rap groups that I had heard of, but I really didn't know their material very well. So I punched them up on YouTube like everybody else, and I still noticed a couple of interesting things with it. So there's a group called KRS One.
Yeah.
I think they're not. I don't think that's
Not
very contemporary, right
person.
there. Pardon
He's
me.
one.
Say
He's one person.
one
Not a.
person. Okay, so I listened to KRS One song called I think it's called "Criminal Minded,"
Yes.
and the first thing I heard was "Hey Jude" by the Beatles.
Okay.
I turned on EPMD and I heard a sample from Eric Clapton, which, in
Hmm.
fairness, is a remake of a song that was originally made by Bob Marley. But the point is, white culture and black culture are, I think, somewhat enmeshed in popular music.
Hmm.
So the notion of appropriation, I keep coming back to that because who's stealing from who if everybody's using everybody else's material? Um, how do you put a kind of how do you put a boundary around what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? And I'd like to hear you kind of articulate that.
Well, I know in the music realm, if you are going to sample, which is, I guess, that's the name for appropriation in music. When you want to borrow from someone else's
Interesting.
ideas, you sample it,
Yeah,
and you have to pay royalties for it. So KRS-One sampled that. I'm sure Eric Clapton got something from it, or the Beatles. That doesn't happen for us.
I see. Okay, so I see. So when there's an economic benefit to it,
Hmm.
and and you don't reap an economic benefit, then it becomes appropriation.
Yes. Then there's insult to injury.
Interesting. So um, back to Chris Emdin for a second. So this is a guy, for the benefit of others who may be watching who haven't heard of Chris Emdin, professor at Columbia University. He's got a TED Talk, which I'll find the link and put that into the description, where he talks about infusing hip hop culture or borrowing elements of hip hop to help kids learn in school. He's talking about really using elements of speech and style and how to impart knowledge, borrowing from hip hop. And he also talks about borrowing elements of um, black church and preachers and all. So my question is, how do you, in your experience as a teacher, how can you really bring that into the classroom? And does it scale? I mean, maybe Vivett Dukes can do it, but not everybody can. Maybe the woman who approached you that day might be a tougher thing. And if it's truly a part of the curriculum, how does that scale? And how are kids in all schools, black and white, going to benefit from this, what Chris Emdin is talking about?
I think one of the ways that we help bridge that gap is to hire more black and brown teachers disproportionately. Um, I know in New York, schools are seg- segregated, and there are often schools where they're predominantly non-black teachers teaching predominantly black students. So that needs to change. Secondly, I think that there needs to be some authentic professional development. And if using hip hop, as Dr. Emden is sug- suggesting, then teachers need to be trained.
Mm.
You need to get some training in it, just like if you wanted to teach Shakespeare, but really this was your first time teaching Shakespeare, you wouldn't just dive right in. You would get some,
Right.
training.
No, everything you're saying is eminently reasonable. However, there's a reality in public schools, and I may be off by a percentage or two, but not by much.
Mhm.
80% of teachers are white women. And, what Dr. Emden is saying is, you need to pick up elements of hip hop, you need to pick up elements of preacher's oration style. And, if you want that to be a part of the professional development, it would seem to me, you're going to need to hire preachers and rappers, but there's not enough of them working in public schools, not even close. So how do you do that?
I don't think you just need preachers and rappers. I think the very students that you're attempting to teach know a lot. They can teach you also. There's some college kids who you could get to come in and teach you some things. There are enough resources, and hip hop has become so much of mainstream America's musical style and is really a part of everything from fashion and everything else, that finding people to help in that vein shouldn't be that hard. I mean, I might sound naive. I don't think it's that hard. I really don't. There may be teacher experts among them. Hey, I'm thinking about doing a lesson on so and so. Do you know a good song I could use? I mean, there are whole websites dedicated to this stuff. Do the work, do the backwards planning like you would for everything else.
Right. Make it a part of the professional development, and it'll just work like everything else. Well, listen, I want to thank you for being a guest on my program. I've taken almost a half an hour of your time. It's been an interesting discussion about language appropriation and I think some broader issues too. And I hope you'll come back on and be a guest again. I wish you luck. Keep writing. New York School Talk is a great blog. I'm hoping that you're going to.
Also, the Educators Room. I recently became a staff writer for the Educators Room. So log on there also. I'll be there too.
Do you know the web address of that one?
Sure. The educatorsroom.org.
Okay. I'll look it up. I'll look it up and put that into the description box as well. Thanks again, Vivett, the stream.
Okay.